tribe. Nevertheless, the greatest attribute to Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam was, and all historians agree to this, they say his resemblance to Prophet, peace be upon him. He was so like the Prophet in many, many different ways. Number one, his appearance. He looked like the Prophet. Number two, his manner, his akhlaq was like the Prophet's, peace be upon him. Number three, his speech, the way he talked was like the Prophet, peace be upon him. And this is why whenever Imam Hussein and anybody else in the family was missing the Prophet, they would ask to see Ali Akbar al-Islam. And this is why it was so difficult for Imam Hussein Islam to give his permission for Ali Akbar, because he resembles so much like the Prophet. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now some say Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam went out into battlefield after Hazrat Abbas or Qasim. Some say he was the first from the family during the time of Zod, when all the companions are being martyred. So, I already mentioned to you, for Imam Hussein Islam, it was very difficult. Eventually, he gave permission to everybody, but not to Ali. He looks up to the sky and he says, "Oh Allah, bear witness against those people that a man has gone out who most resembles your Prophet." This is what Imam Hussein Islam says at the moment of time when Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam leaves. He embraces his son so much, they both cry because he was so dear to him. Narrations once say that there's an alim who went to Hazrat Imam Hussein Islam's shrine and he kept asking for a request and it wouldn't come true. Then he had a dream that night, and in that dream, the message was that ask through Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam to ask Imam Hussein Islam, and watch. No other dua, whatever you ask for will be fulfilled if you use Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam. And even today, Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam is lying at the feet of Imam Hussein Islam.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Just to mention on a side note, when we read Ziyarat al-Shah, Ali Akbar al-Islam has a special mention in there. When we say, "Peace be upon you, Hussein," then we say, "Oh Ali, son of Hussein." Then we say, "All the family of Hussein," and then the companions of Hussein. It mentions how important Ali Akbar al-Islam is. So the day of Ashura comes, and Fajr time, Imam Hussein Islam says, "Oh Ali Akbar, give the azan. I want to hear for the last time the sound of my Prophet, peace be upon him, because you sound so much like him." When Hazrat Ali Akbar Islam gave the azan, it echoed throughout the whole of the land of Karbala. Everybody started to cry, the women started to cry as well. And then the battle began. As the battle began, Imam Hussein Islam would watch. Each person would go out and then wouldn't come back. He would have to go and get his body. And bit by bit, everybody was going and getting martyred. Then it came to the time where Ali Akbar Islam comes to his father and says, "Father, give me permission to go for jihad." Now it's easy when you hear this, but just think for a second that if you are a father, you love your son so much and your son is coming to you and asking that, "Give me ijazat to go and die, to fight in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I won't be coming back." Allahu Akbar, it's so difficult. And look at the patience of Imam Hussein Islam. He knew he had to, because he promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why we say Imam Hussein is so Mazloom. Eventually he says, "Oh Ali Akbar, go and ask permission from your mother. Then go and ask permission from your auntie Zainab." When Ali Akbar Islam goes to get the permission, Bibi Laila gives him the permission. Then he goes to Bibi Zainab, and again Bibi Zainab had a part in his growing up. She looked after him as well. So it was difficult for Bibi Zainab to say yes. But this is where Ali Akbar Islam says to Bibi Zainab, he says, "Oh Bibi Zainab, I'm Ali Akbar and I'm your son. And whose life is more important, mine or the son of Bibi Fatima Zahra Islam, Hussein?" She says, "I will sacrifice 1,000 lives for Bibi Fatima Zahra's son Hussein." So then he says, "Give me permission to go." So she says, "Okay, Ali Akbar, go." Ali Akbar mounts on the horse and he begins to pick up pace and is now riding the horse. He hears the footsteps of Imam Hussein Islam behind him. He turns around and says, "Baba, why are you still walking towards me when you've given me permission?" He says, "I'm just watching you, son. I'm just saying goodbye to you." Then he begins to on the horse to try and ride faster. He still begins to hear the sound. He turns around again. And this is so heartbreaking when he turns around and sees this 57-year-old man. 3 days he's not eaten or drunk anything, and he's still following him. Only you were a father, you would understand what is going through my heart. Nevertheless, they embrace. He gets back on the horse and begins to ride off. Then Imam Hussein Islam says, "Still keep looking back at me as you're going unless you can't see me anymore." During the battle, Imam Hussein Islam is very anxious. He's looking at his son as far as he can. He gets a glimpse of his son and he's fighting at a distance and he's still happy. Then there comes a time when his face changes because he cannot see Ali Akbar anymore. So when Bibi Laila sees the face of Imam Hussein, she quickly gets a praying mat, sits on it and starts to pray. She says, "Oh Allah, you returned Prophet Yusuf's son back to him. You returned Yusuf back to his father. You returned Musa back to his mother. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please return Ali Akbar back to his father." At that moment in time, Shahzada Ali Akbar returns with a smile on his face and he says, "Father, did you see how I fought out there? I killed around 120, this is what historians say, around 120 Yazidis he killed." He was very happy to mention this to his father because he knew the praise he would get. Nothing more rewarding than a son getting the praise from his father. Salawat. But then he mentions this to his father. He says, "Father, I'm thirsty. I could kill so many more. If only there was a drop of water." Imam Hussein Islam's heart breaks and he knows there's no water. Now, many narrations say different things at this point. They say that either Imam Hussein Islam said, "Place your tongue into my tongue to get a comfort," but then Ali Akbar moves his tongue because he realizes that his father's tongue is more dry than his. Others say that he gives a ring to place in his mouth to get that comfort. But nevertheless, he then returns. Ali Akbar went back into the battlefield. He continues to kill more soldiers to the extent that he is now becoming unstoppable. Umar ibn Sa'd shouts out, "All of you surround him, go at once." Whilst he was distracted, one of them threw a spear into Ali Akbar's chest. At that moment, he fell saying, "My salam, father." Notice he didn't say, "Oh father, come, I need your help," because Ali Akbar knew how will his father reach him. Allahu Akbar. When his father heard, he started to run, but he kept falling. Some narrators say that he began to run in the wrong direction. And they say that at that moment in time, he couldn't see where he was going. It's hard to imagine, brothers and sisters, that when you know that your son now is lying somewhere on the ground and is being hit. Nevertheless, Imam starts to crawl. This is one of the narrations. It's as though the earth in front of his feet has left. There's no strength left. So Imam Hussein starts to crawl towards Ali Akbar's body. At that moment he says, "Oh Ali, oh Ali." Now we don't know whether he was asking, "Oh Ali Akbar, tell me where you are," or whether he was saying, "Oh Baba Ali, help me so I can reach my son." He eventually gets to Ali Akbar's body. Pray that no father sees his son in the way that Ali Akbar saw his son. He sees his son lying on the ground with a big spear pierced into his chest. "Father, I am in pain. Please remove this spear," Ali Akbar says. Where would Father Hussein, he's a father at the end of the day, where will he find the strength to remove the spear? Imam nevertheless grabs the spear and tries to pull with all the strength he's got. He tries to pull the spear that's lodged inside the chest of Ali Akbar Aslam. Then he can't do this because he feels that the most chest, the heart, everything's going to pull out. Then he places his knee onto Ali Akbar's body and then tries to pull the broken spear out. At that moment he says, "Oh Nabi Ibrahim, you could not bear to see Ismail during your sacrifice, and you blindfolded yourself. Witness this, O Nabi Ibrahim, I am not blindfolded. O Baba Ali, you used the strength to lift the heavy door of Khyber, but that was easy compared to this, O Father." Eventually, the Imam pulls out the spear, and at that moment, the blood started to gush out rapidly. They say at this moment the death was so slow that Ali Akbar was in so much pain. Then at that moment he started to drag his heels against the ground because he was in so much pain. Oh, Mazlum Hussein was in so much despair that he did not know what else to do. He looked up towards the sky and said, "Life is not worth living anymore." He says, "Life is not worth living anymore." He then fell on Ali Akbar and placed his cheek onto the cheek of Ali Akbar, and he cried and cried and he cried. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात। करबला में हर शहादत एक मुनफरिद अंदाज की शहादत है और माह मुहर्रम में सिर्फ और सिर्फ